Carol Thelma crashed through the cathedral's side exit, her $50,000 wedding gown tangled around her legs like a beautiful trap. Her bare feet slapped against wet concrete as rain hammered down, turning the silk into a second skin that weighed her down with every desperate step. Behind her, men's voices cut through the storm in sharp bursts of English and Korean. "Find her! Seal the perimeter! Mr. Cross wants his bride back, now!" Her lungs screamed for air, but Carol couldn't stop. Stopping meant going back to Sebastian Cross. Going back meant dying slowly in a marriage that would cage her worse than any prison. She tore around the corner into a narrow alley off Itaewon, her carefully pinned updo falling apart, dark curls plastering to her face and neck. The cathedral bells still rang behind her, mocking, celebratory, as if she'd actually said, "I do," instead of climbing out a bathroom window while her bridesmaids thought she was having a moment alone. Blood mixed with rainwater on her palms where she'd cut them on the window latch. The white lace at her wrists was stained pink. Carol's heart pounded so violently she tasted copper. She could hear them getting closer. Sebastian's head of security had dogs, actual dogs, like she was some kind of criminal instead of a woman refusing to be sold. She stumbled into the main street, Noksapyeong, bright with neon signs reflecting off puddles, late-night traffic still thick despite the downpour. A black armored SUV was parallel parked ahead, engine idling, back door open like a dark mouth waiting to swallow someone whole. Carol didn't see the man until she'd already collided with him. 1 second she was running, the next she'd slammed into what felt like a wall of muscle and expensive fabric. Strong hands caught her wrists before she could fall, steadying her with a grip that was both gentle and absolutely unyielding. She looked up, gasping, and the apology died on her lips. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of face that belonged on old Korean film posters. Sharp jawline, eyes so dark they looked black in the neon glow, hooded and unreadable. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, barely visible but somehow making every other feature more severe. His hair was slicked back perfectly despite the rain, and he wore a 3-piece suit in charcoal gray that probably cost more than most people's cars. A platinum watch caught the light at his wrist. A signet ring gleamed on his pinky. Everything about him screamed money and danger in equal measure. "You're bleeding on my Armani," he said in English, his accent barely there, his voice low and measured like someone who'd never had to raise it to be obeyed. Carol tried to pull back, but his grip didn't loosen. Not painful, but absolute. Behind her, she heard the dogs barking, getting closer. Sebastian's men would round that corner any second. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, Who's chasing you?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way someone might study a painting they were considering purchasing. His expression didn't change, didn't soften with sympathy or harden with suspicion. Just that same cool assessment. There's no time." Carol's words tumbled over each other. She could see the shadows of men entering the street behind her, flashlight beams cutting through the rain. The man's gaze flicked over her shoulder, taking in the approaching threat with the same clinical detachment he'd shown her. Then his eyes returned to hers, and something shifted. Not warmth, not kindness, but a decision made. Get in the car. It wasn't a request. Carol hesitated for half a heartbeat. She just escaped one cage. Was she really about to walk into another? Then she heard Sebastian's voice cutting through the storm. "Carol, Carol, you're making this so much worse for yourself." She dove for the SUV's open door. The man slid in after her with fluid grace, and the door slammed shut. The interior was all black leather and tinted windows. 2 men sat in the front, one driving, one in the passenger seat. Both turned to look at her with the same expression, surprise quickly masked by careful neutrality. "Drive," the man beside her said quietly. The SUV pulled into traffic with perfect timing, sliding between cars like water. Through the tinted back window, Carol watched Sebastian's security team spill onto the street, their flashlights sweeping uselessly across empty pavement. She was shaking. Her whole body vibrated with adrenaline and shock, her soaked wedding dress dripping onto the leather seats. She probably looked insane. A runaway bride covered in blood and rain, hyperventilating in a stranger's car. The man reached forward and pulled a bottle of water from a compartment, offering it to her without comment. Carol took it with trembling hands but didn't drink. She just held it, trying to anchor herself to something solid. "You want to tell me," the man said conversationally, adjusting his cufflinks with careful precision, "why Sebastian Cross's bride is running barefoot through my territory?" The water bottle slipped from Carol's fingers. The man caught it before it could fall, setting it aside. He turned to face her fully, and in the close confines of the car, Carol could see just how carefully controlled everything about him was. The way he breathed, the way he held his hands, the way he looked at her like she was a puzzle he'd already solved. "You know, Sebastian," her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Everyone knows Sebastian Cross." He smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing Carol had ever seen. Not cruel, not angry, just empty of warmth. "The question is, does he know you ran to me?" I didn't know." Carol's heart was hammering again, but for a different reason now. "Who are you?" The man in the passenger seat glanced back, his expression somewhere between amused and pitying. "My name is Tae-jun," the man beside her said, his voice still that same velvet-wrapped blade. He reached forward and picked up something from the seat pocket, a silver case. He opened it, revealing a business card in both Korean and English. 7 stars arranged in a circle. A name in bold, Kim Tae-jun, 7 Stars Syndicate. Carol's blood ran cold. She'd heard of the 7 Stars. Everyone in Seoul's expatriate circles had heard whispers. The kind of organization that made problems disappear. The kind of men who owned judges and police commissioners. The kind of power that made Sebastian Cross's political connections look like amateur hour. She'd run from a monster straight into the den of a wolf. "You run from a dog only to run into a wolf," Tae-jun said, echoing her thoughts with eerie precision. He tucked the card back into its case. "Bad luck, little bird." The SUV turned smoothly onto the highway, carrying her away from the cathedral, away from Sebastian, away from everything she'd known, and towards something Carol suspected might be far more dangerous than anything she'd left behind. Will Carol escape Tae-jun's possessive grip, or will she choose the devil she ran to over the monster she fled? Subscribe to find out, and comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far Carol's story has traveled. The bridal suite had smelled like lilies and lies. Carol had stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at the stranger in the white gown, while her bridesmaids adjusted her train, and her mother fussed with the veil. Through the door, she could hear the organ beginning to play. 200 guests waiting in the pews. Sebastian waiting at the altar in his white tuxedo, that perfect smile on his face. The same smile he'd worn when he'd grabbed her throat last week and told her exactly what would happen if she embarrassed him. "I need a moment," Carol had whispered. "Just 5 minutes alone." Her maid of honor had looked concerned, but her mother had nodded approvingly. "Bridal nerves, perfectly normal. We'll be right outside, darling." The moment the door clicked shut, Carol was at the window, the bathroom window. 3 stories up, but there was a ledge, and below that, a decorative trellis covered in roses. Her hands shook as she gathered the massive skirt, shoving it through the window first, then climbing after it. The latch cut her palm. She didn't care. The trellis held for the first 2 feet, then it started to crack. Carol dropped the last 6 feet, landing hard in the rose bushes. Thorns tore at the lace, at her arms. She scrambled up, kicked off the silk heels that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and ran. Behind her, she heard someone scream her name from the window. The rain had started just as she hit the street, as if the universe itself was providing cover for her escape. Now, sitting in Tae-jun's car, Carol watched Seoul's glittering skyline blur past the tinted windows. The two men in the front seat hadn't spoken since they'd started driving. Tae-jun sat beside her in perfect stillness, occasionally glancing at his phone, scrolling through messages with the kind of casual detachment that suggested runaway brides were just another Tuesday inconvenience. The sedan slowed suddenly. Carol looked up and felt her stomach drop. 3 black vehicles blocked the road ahead, arranged in a V formation. Men in dark suits stood in front of them, and even through the rain-streaked window, Carol recognized the lead man. James Park, Sebastian's head of security. Former military, the kind of man who smiled when he hurt people. "Boss," the driver said quietly. "I see them." Tae-jun set his phone aside. "Stop the car." "Sir, stop. The car." The sedan rolled to a halt 20 feet from the blockade. The men in front tensed, hands moving to their jackets. Carol counted at least 8 of them, all armed if the bulges under their suit coats were any indication. Tae-jun buttoned his suit jacket with precise movements, checking his cufflinks one more time. "Stay in the car," he told Carol, his voice still that same unnerving calm. Then he stepped out into the rain. Carol pressed her face to the window, watching as Tae-jun walked forward alone, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. James Park stepped forward to meet him, and even from here, Carol could see the fury on his face. "Mr. Kim," James called out, his voice barely audible through the glass. "We're here for the girl. This doesn't concern you." Tae-jun stopped, head tilting slightly. "The girl in my car? That girl? She's Sebastian Cross's fiancée. She's confused, upset. We're just here to bring her home safely." "Home?" Tae-jun seemed to taste the word. "Is that what you call it?" The driver's window rolled down slightly, just enough for Carol to hear clearly now. "This isn't your business," James said, his hand moving closer to his jacket. "Mr. Cross has resources, connections. He's spoken to the police commissioner personally." "Has he?" Tae-jun's voice carried an edge of amusement now. "And did the commissioner tell him whose territory this is?" The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken threat. James's confidence flickered. "Look, we don't want trouble." "Then leave." Tae-jun took another step forward, and suddenly all 8 men tensed, hands on their weapons. But they didn't draw. Something held them back, some instinct that told them drawing on Kim Tae-jun would be the last mistake they ever made. "She's in my territory now," Tae-jun continued, his voice dropping lower. "She came to me. That makes her mine until I decide otherwise. Sebastian won't accept—" "I don't recall asking what Sebastian Cross will accept." Tae-jun pulled one hand from his pocket and Carol saw him holding a phone. He raised it, snapped a photo of James and his men, then tucked it away. "Tell your employer that if he wants to discuss the matter, he knows how to reach me. But these men—" He gestured casually at the blockade. "They leave, now, before I decide they're trespassing." Carol watched in disbelief as James Park, former Special Forces, a man she'd seen physically intimidate diplomats, took a step back. "This isn't over," James said, but his voice had lost its edge. "No," Tae-jun agreed. "It isn't." He smiled then, and it was the same terrifying emptiness Carol had seen before. "But it will be, one way or another." The sedan's back doors opened, and 2 more men stepped out. Tae-jun's people who'd been in the front seats. They weren't pointing weapons, but they didn't need to. Their presence alone shifted the balance. More vehicles appeared from side streets, boxing in Sebastian's men from behind. James looked at the odds, looked at Tae-jun's unwavering expression, and made the smart choice. "Move the cars," he ordered his men. Within 60 seconds, the blockade was gone, and Sebastian's people were retreating into the rain. Tae-jun walked back to the sedan, still completely dry somehow despite the downpour, and slid in beside Carol. He didn't look at her, just nodded to his driver. The penthouse. They drove in silence for another 20 minutes. Carol's heart wouldn't stop racing. She'd watched Taejun face down 8 armed men like he was shooing away pigeons. No fear, no hesitation, just absolute confidence that they would bend to his will. And they had. "You're shaking," Taejun observed without looking at her. "You just—" "They had guns, and I have more guns, better guns, and better men to use them." He finally turned to meet her eyes. "Did you think Sebastian Cross was the most dangerous man in Seoul, little bird?" Carol swallowed hard. "I'm starting to realize he isn't." "Good." Taejun looked back at his phone. "Fear is the beginning of wisdom." The penthouse was on the top 3 floors of a tower in Gangnam. The elevator required a key card and a fingerprint scan. When the doors opened, Carol stepped into a space that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River, the city spreading out below like a blanket of lights. Everything was clean lines and dark wood, leather furniture and abstract art that probably cost more than her education. A woman in a simple black dress stood waiting by a doorway, middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "This is Mrs. Huang," Taejun said, shrugging out of his wet jacket. Somehow his shirt was still perfectly pressed. "She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her." Mrs. Huang bowed slightly. "Miss, please come with me. I'll show you to your room." Carol followed her down a hallway lined with more expensive art, her ruined wedding dress leaving a trail of water on the marble floor. The room Mrs. Huang led her to was bigger than Carol's entire apartment had been. King-sized bed with black silk sheets, another wall of windows, an ensuite bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. "There are clothes in the closet," Mrs. Huang said gently. "They should fit. I'll bring you something to eat." "I don't—" Carol's voice cracked. "I don't understand what's happening." Mrs. Huang's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy or pity. "Rest first. Understanding can wait." She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Carol stood alone in the beautiful cage, her dress dripping, her hands still bleeding from the window latch. She walked to the windows and looked down at the city far below. Somewhere out there, Sebastian was mobilizing his people, making calls, calling in favors. And she was here, in the penthouse of a man whose name made armed security guards retreat. She didn't know if she'd been saved or captured. Maybe, she thought, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. It was both. Carol woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was still in the cathedral, still waiting to walk down the aisle. Then she saw the black silk sheets, the unfamiliar room, and everything came crashing back. She'd fallen asleep in the bathtub somewhere around 3 a.m. after scrubbing the blood and mud from her skin. Someone, Mrs. Huang probably, had moved her to the bed and tucked her in like a child. Now the bedside clock read 11:47 a.m. Carol found clothes laid out on a chair. Black silk pajamas, soft as water. She put them on and ventured out of the room. The penthouse was quiet. Morning light poured through the massive windows, making the river below sparkle. Carol followed the smell of coffee into an open-plan kitchen where Mrs. Huang was preparing lunch. "Ah, you're awake," the older woman said warmly. "Sit, please. You must be hungry." Carol sat at the marble island, and Mrs. Huang placed a bowl of miokguk in front of her, seaweed soup, rich and nourishing. Then rice, banchan, and a mug of black coffee. "Where is he?" Carol asked. "Taejun? Mr. Kim is working. He asked me to tell you he'll return this evening." Mrs. Huang hesitated, then added more gently, "He also asked me to tell you that your things from the cathedral have been retrieved, if you want them." "My things?" "Your purse, your phone, though Mr. Kim has had it examined to ensure there's no tracking software. And—" Mrs. Huang disappeared into another room and returned holding the wedding dress, cleaned and pressed, looking almost new despite the torn hem. "This." Carol stared at the white silk that represented everything she'd run from. "Why would he keep it?" I don't presume to understand Mr. Kim's reasons. Mrs. Huang folded the dress carefully. But he is not a careless man. Nothing he does is without purpose. After eating, Carol explored. The penthouse was a study in controlled luxury. She wandered through a library with books in Korean, English, and Japanese. A home office with a door that wouldn't open, locked. A gym. A room full of security monitors showing various angles of the building, the street outside, the parking garage. And everywhere, subtle reminders that this wasn't a home. It was a fortress. She found Tae-jun in the main living area at exactly 6:17 p.m., standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of whiskey, still wearing his work clothes, black three-piece suit, platinum watch catching the fading sunlight. "You're awake," he said without turning around. "Good. We need to talk." Carol stayed near the doorway, maintaining distance. "About what?" "About why you can't leave." He finally turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. "Your fiancé has put a bounty on your head. 500 million won to anyone who brings you back to him. Alive, preferably. But he didn't specify it had to be." The number hit her like a physical blow. That's nearly $500,000 US. 400,000, give or take." Tae-jun took a sip of his whiskey. "Sebastian Cross is highly motivated to get you back, which means every two-bit gangster in Seoul is now looking for a beautiful black woman in a wedding dress." "I'm not wearing a wedding dress anymore." "No." His gaze traveled over her slowly, assessing. "But you're distinctive, memorable. That makes you valuable and vulnerable." Carol's hands clenched into fists. "So what am I supposed to do? Stay here forever? For now?" "Yes." He set his glass down and walked to the fireplace, a modern gas unit with real flames. "I need you to understand something, Miss Thelma. Sebastian Cross is connected. Police, prosecutors, judges. He has people everywhere. If you try to run, you won't make it 2 blocks before someone turns you in for the reward. And if I stay here, I'm your prisoner. You're my guest. With a locked door, I'm betting." "With protection," Tae-jun corrected. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "There's a difference." Mrs. Huang appeared in the doorway, carrying Carol's wedding dress on a hanger. She glanced between them nervously. "Bring it here," Tae-jun said. Mrs. Huang crossed the room and handed him the dress, then quickly retreated. Tae-jun held it up, examining the delicate lace, the hand-sewn crystals, the massive train. $50,000, he said. "Give or take." 62, actually, Carol said bitterly. Sebastian insisted on Vera Wang. "Of course he did." Tae-jun walked to the fireplace. "He wanted you to look like a prize, something beautiful to show off at parties, a trophy wife to add to his collection of expensive things." "Yes." "Well," Tae-jun threw the dress into the fire. Carol gasped, lurching forward instinctively. "What are you—" The silk caught immediately, flames consuming the white fabric in seconds. The crystals cracked and popped in the heat. Within a minute, all that remained was ash and the acrid smell of burning synthetic fibers. Tae-jun watched it burn with that same clinical detachment he showed everything. "You're not his anymore," he said quietly. "Not his trophy, not his wife, not his anything." Carol stared at the ashes, emotions warring in her chest. Part of her wanted to scream at him for destroying something that cost more than most cars. Or part of her wanted to thank him for burning away the last physical reminder of the cage she'd nearly been locked in forever. "But I'm yours now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tae-jun turned to look at her, and something flickered in those dark eyes. Not quite warmth, but not entirely cold either. "You're under my protection. What you are beyond that," he paused. "We'll see." The next morning, Carol met the staff properly. Mrs. Huang introduced them one by one as they gathered in the kitchen. There was Jin Woo, who handled security and drove Tae-jun's cars. Min Seok, who managed communications and technology. Yuna, who worked as both Taijun's assistant and the household's accountant. They all watched Carol with variations of the same expression, respectful but wary, like she was a possibly dangerous artifact that had appeared in their midst. "They're not servants," Taejun said, appearing in the doorway with his morning coffee. He wore casual clothes today, black slacks and a gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Carol's monthly salary at the gallery. "They're soldiers, members of 7 Stars. Carol looked at them again, seeing it now. The way they stood, the way they moved. Jinwoo had tattoos peeking out from under his collar, traditional Korean designs mixed with something that looked like military insignia. Minsok wore an earpiece even at breakfast. "So I'm living with the Mafia," Carol said flatly. "We prefer independent security organization," Yuna said with a slight smile. "Better for taxes." Despite herself, Carol almost laughed. Taejun set his coffee down and looked at Carol directly. "There are rules," he said, "while you're here." "Of course there are." He ignored her tone. "First, you don't leave the penthouse without me or one of my men accompanying you. Not to the lobby, not to the roof, nowhere. The building is secure, but Sebastian has eyes everywhere." "Fine." "Second, you don't lie to me. About anything. I don't care if the truth is ugly or inconvenient. Lies get people killed in my world." Carol met his gaze. "I can do that." "Third," his voice dropped slightly, taking on an edge. "Never look at another man when I'm in the room." The kitchen went very quiet. Carol blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I'm not your possession. I'm not some object you can—" "No," Taejun agreed. "You're not. But as long as you're under my roof, wearing clothes I provide, eating food I paid for, and breathing because my protection keeps you alive." He stepped closer, and Carol had to fight the urge to step back. "You will show me respect. That means when I speak to you, you listen. When I enter a room, you acknowledge it. And when we are in public together, you make it very clear who you are with." "Why?" Carol demanded, anger flaring hot in her chest. "Because you're possessive. Because you need to mark your territory like an animal. Because perception is survival," Taejun said coldly. "If other men think you're available, they'll try to take you. For the bounty, for leverage, for a dozen reasons that end with you dead or worse. If they believe you're mine, they'll think twice." The logic was sound. Carol hated that it was sound. "I'm not a pet," she said through clenched teeth. "No." Taijun's expression didn't change. "You're a refugee in hostile territory, and I'm the only thing standing between you and Sebastian Cross. So you'll follow my rules, or you're welcome to try your luck on the streets." They stared at each other, the tension crackling like electricity. Finally, Carol looked away first. "Fine," she bit out. "Your rules." "Good." Taijun picked up his coffee again, the moment passing as quickly as it had arrived. "Mrs. Huang, make sure Miss Thelma has appropriate clothes. We may need to make public appearances soon." He left the kitchen, and Carol released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "He's not always that intense," Yuna offered quietly. "Just most of the time?" Carol asked bitterly. "Only when the stakes are this high." Yuna started clearing dishes. "Sebastian Cross isn't some street-level thug. He has resources, connections, for Mr. Kim to directly oppose him." She shook her head. "It could start a war." "Then why did he take me?" Carol asked. "Why not just hand me over and avoid the problem?" The staff exchanged glances. "We've been wondering the same thing," Jinwoo admitted. 3 days later, the answer arrived in a white box. Carol was reading in the library when she heard shouting from the front of the penthouse. She set down her book and moved toward the commotion, finding Taijun standing in the entryway holding the box. His face was carved from stone. Jinwoo and Min Seok flanked him, both with weapons drawn. "What is it?" Carol asked. Taejun's jaw tightened. "A message from your fiancé." He set the box on the entry table and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a human finger. Carol gasped, stumbling backward. The finger was male, severed cleanly, with a 7 stars ring still on it. "Park Jae-sung," Jin-woo said quietly, his voice tight with rage. "He was collecting protection money in Itaewon yesterday. He never checked in." Tae-jun pulled out a small card that had been tucked beside the finger. He read it, his expression growing darker with each word, then held it up so Carol could see. "Return what's mine, and I'll return what's yours. SC asterisk." "This is my fault," Carol whispered. "If I hadn't come here, If you hadn't come here, Sebastian would still be a problem," Tae-jun interrupted. "Just a different kind." He closed the box carefully. "Min-seok, so call Dr. Lee. Tell him we need Park Jae-sung's finger prepared for proper burial. Jin-woo, double security. I want eyes on every approach to this building." Both men moved immediately. Tae-jun turned to Carol, and for the first time she saw real anger in his eyes. Not the cold detachment, actual fury burning underneath the surface. "Sebastian Cross thinks he can threaten me," Tae-jun said quietly. "He thinks mutilating my people will make me surrender you, like some terrified shopkeeper paying protection money." He stepped closer. "He has badly miscalculated." "What are you going to do?" Carol asked. "I'm going to end him." Simple. Definitive. "But I need information. Sebastian is more dangerous than I initially assessed. He has resources I didn't anticipate, connections that go deeper than I thought." Carol's mind raced. She'd spent 6 months engaged to Sebastian, living in his penthouse, attending his parties. 6 months of being the perfect fiancé while trying to find a way out. 6 months of listening to him talk business on the phone, watching him meet with associates, overhearing things she probably wasn't supposed to hear. "I have information," she said suddenly. "About Sebastian." Tae-jun's eyes sharpened. "What kind of information?" "Offshore accounts, shell companies. He was moving money, a lot of money, and hiding it from his business partners. I overheard him on the phone one night, talking about accounts in the Cayman Islands in Singapore. He thought I was asleep, but I wasn't." Carol stepped closer. "I don't have passwords or anything like that, but I remember names, company names, bank names, people he was working with." The anger in Tae-jun's expression shifted into something more calculating. "How good is your memory?" "Perfect," Carol said. "I have a photographic memory for numbers and names. It's part of why I was good at my job, at the gallery. I could remember every artist, every sale, every piece's provenance." Tae-jun studied her for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Min-seok," he called. The younger man reappeared from the security room. "Yes, boss?" "Bring me a laptop and recording equipment." Tae-jun looked back at Carol. "We're going to have a very long conversation about Sebastian Cross's finances." "And then what?" Carol asked. Tae-jun's smile was sharp and cold. "Then I'm going to do what Sebastian should have feared from the beginning. I'm going to take everything he has, piece by piece, until he has nothing left but the choice between running or dying." Carol should have been afraid. She was trapped in the penthouse of a crime lord who just received a severed finger as a threat. She should have been terrified. Instead, looking at Tae-jun's cold fury, all she felt was a savage satisfaction. Sebastian had hurt her, controlled her, tried to cage her forever. Now he'd made an enemy of someone who knew how to hurt him back. "Let's start with the banks," Carol said. Carol spent 2 days giving Tae-jun everything she knew about Sebastian's financial operations. Bank names, shell companies, the coded language Sebastian used when talking to his lawyers. Min-seok recorded it all, cross-referencing against databases that Carol suspected weren't exactly legal to access. On the 3rd day, Tae-jun walked into her room carrying a garment bag. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going out." Carol looked up from the book she'd been reading. "I thought I couldn't leave the penthouse." "You can't leave without me." He laid the garment bag on her bed. "Today, You're leaving with me. The car, a sleek black sedan with bulletproof windows, Carol had learned, took them to an unmarked building in Cheongdam-dong. Taejun led her through a private entrance and up to a floor that looked more like an art gallery than a tailor shop. Mannequins displayed clothing that belonged on runways, not in stores. An elegant man in his 60s greeted them, bowing deeply to Taejun before turning assessing eyes on Carol. "Mr. Kim," he said in accented English, "this is the client?" "This is Miss Thelma," Taejun confirmed. "She needs an entirely new wardrobe. Everything. No white, no pastels." The tailor circled Carol slowly, the way an artist might study a sculpture. "Beautiful bone structure. The contrast with darker colors will be striking." He looked at Taejun. "Your usual aesthetic?" "With adjustments." Taejun's gaze traveled over Carol in a way that made her skin prickle. "I want her to look dangerous, not delicate. For the next 2 hours." Carol was measured, draped in fabrics, shown sketches and swatches. Taejun sat in a leather chair watching, occasionally vetoing choices with a simple shake of his head. Too soft, too plain, too forgettable. The tailor brought out a dress in crimson silk, the color of arterial blood. High neck, long sleeves, but cut to fit like a second skin. Carol stepped behind a privacy screen to try it on, struggling with the hidden zipper along the spine. "Let me," Taejun said from directly behind her. Carol froze. She hadn't heard him approach. His fingers found the zipper, cool against her bare back. He drew it up slowly, the rasp of metal teeth the only sound in the suddenly quiet room. When he reached the top, his hands settled on her shoulders, turning her to face the mirror. Carol barely recognized herself. The dress transformed her from runaway bride into something else entirely, something that belonged in Taejun's dark, dangerous world. "Perfect," Taejun murmured, his breath ghosting against her ear. His hands slid down her arms, leaving goosebumps in their wake. "Do you see it now? What you could be?" "What am I supposed to be?" Carol asked, her voice catching. "Mine." His fingers tightened slightly. Not his broken trophy, not some art curator he could cage and control. Mine. Dangerous. Untouchable. His lips brushed the shell of her ear. "Touch you, and I'll burn their world down. Threaten you, and I'll erase them from existence. That's what it means to be mine, little bird." It should have terrified her. These weren't promises. They were threats wrapped in velvet. But Carol's heart was racing for entirely different reasons. "The gala is tomorrow night," Taejun continued. "Sebastian will be there. Every important person in Seoul will be there, and you're going to walk in on my arm wearing this dress and show him exactly what he lost." Carol met his eyes in the mirror. "What if he tries something?" "Then he dies. Simple, absolute. But he won't. Not in public. Not yet. He'll posture and threaten and try to intimidate you." Taejun's smile was cold. That's when you smile at him and remember that you belong to someone more dangerous than he could ever dream of being. The gala was held in a converted museum, all marble columns and soaring ceilings. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across Seoul's elite, politicians in expensive suits, corporate executives with their designer-clad wives, and scattered among them, men who looked like Taejun. Dangerous, controlled, predatory. Carol wore the crimson dress. Taejun had sent Yuna to help with her hair and makeup, dark, dramatic, nothing like the soft pastels Sebastian had always insisted on. Diamond earrings that Taejun produced from somewhere glittered at her ears. "Borrowed from a friend," he'd said, fastening them himself. "Or stolen from an enemy. Does it matter?" They entered together, Taejun's hand at the small of her back, and Carol felt every eye in the room turn toward them. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. "Is that Kim Taejun with Sebastian Cross's fiancé?" Tae-jun guided her through the room with proprietary confidence, introducing her to people whose names Carol recognized from news articles about corruption scandals and corporate takeovers. Everyone watched them with barely concealed fascination. Then she saw him. Sebastian stood near the bar, surrounded by his usual entourage of lawyers and political allies. He wore a gray suit that probably cost $10,000, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes, when they met Carol's, burned with barely suppressed rage. Tae-jun felt her tense. "Breathe," he murmured. "You're not afraid of him anymore. Remember?" Carol lifted her chin and smiled, not the soft, demure smile Sebastian had trained into her, but something sharper, something that had teeth. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Mr. Kim," a voice called out. An older man in an expensive suit approached, hand extended. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Minister Park," Tae-jun replied smoothly, shaking his hand. "So I decided it was time to be more socially visible." The minister's eyes flicked to Carol with barely disguised curiosity. "And your lovely companion?" "Carol Thelma," Tae-jun said, his hand sliding possessively around her waist. "My guest." Not his date, his guest. The implication was clear. She was under his protection, his possession, his territory. The evening continued in a surreal blur. Carol danced with Tae-jun, his hand never leaving her back, their bodies moving together with a synchronicity that felt almost dangerous. She drank champagne and made polite conversation and tried not to stare at Sebastian, who watched them from across the room with murder in his eyes. At exactly 10:47 p.m., everything went wrong. A waiter approached their table carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Carol noticed him because his movements were too stiff, too focused. While other servers navigated the crowd with practiced ease, this one moved with military precision. Tae-jun was turned away, speaking with a business associate. The waiter was 3 feet away, his hand moving to his jacket. Carol didn't think. She grabbed the nearest champagne bottle from the ice bucket and swung it with all her strength. The heavy glass connected with the waiter's temple with a sickening crack. He went down hard, something metallic clattering from his hand. A knife, Carol realized. A knife meant for Tae-jun's back. The room erupted into chaos. People screamed. Security rushed forward. Tae-jun spun around, his hand already inside his jacket, pulling a gun Carol hadn't known he was carrying. But the threat was already neutralized. The would-be assassin lay unconscious at Carol's feet, blood trickling from his scalp, the knife 3 feet away. Tae-jun looked at the man, then at Carol, then at the champagne bottle still gripped in her trembling hands. "Well," he said softly, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time since she'd met him. "That was unexpected." Jin Woo and 2 other Seven Stars men appeared from nowhere, hauling the unconscious attacker away. Other security guards tried to calm the panicked guests. Someone was already spinning a cover story, a drunk patron who'd gotten aggressive, nothing to worry about. Tae-jun holstered his weapon and took the bottle from Carol's shaking hands, setting it aside. Then he pulled her close, his hand cradling the back of her head. "You saved my life," he murmured against her hair. I just reacted exactly." He pulled back to look at her, and something had shifted in his dark eyes. Not warmth, not quite, but recognition, respect. "You didn't freeze, you didn't scream. You acted." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You're not a liability, little bird. You're an asset." Across the room, Sebastian Cross watched them with undisguised hatred. 2 days later, Carol sat in the library with a cup of tea Mrs. Huang had prepared. The older woman had been especially kind since the gala, fussing over Carol like a worried mother. "Drink," Mrs. Huang insisted. "It will help you sleep. You've been having nightmares." Carol had been. Dreams of knives and blood, and Sebastian's cold smile. She took the tea gratefully, drinking half the cup before setting it aside. Mrs. Huang hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "Miss Carol, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" Carol asked, but her tongue felt thick suddenly. The room tilted slightly. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Huang whispered, and there were tears in her eyes. "They have my son. They have David, and they said they'd kill him if I didn't—" The cup slipped from Carol's fingers, shattering on the floor. The last thing Carol saw before darkness claimed her was Mrs. Huang crying and the shadows of men in gray suits entering the penthouse. Taejun returned home to silence. The penthouse was never silent. There was always music or voices or the sound of Mrs. Huang cooking. But now there was nothing, just an oppressive quiet that made his instincts scream danger. He found the broken teacup first, then the drops of blood leading to the bedroom. Then the empty room. "Carol!" His voice echoed through the penthouse, but he already knew she wouldn't answer. Jinwoo burst in 30 seconds later. "Boss, the security feeds were looped. Someone disabled." "Find her." Taejun's voice was utterly calm, but his hands were shaking. The first time in 10 years, his hands had shaken. "Mobilize everyone. I want every contact, every informant, every person who owes us a favor on the street, looking for her. Now. Sir. And find Mrs. Huang. She did this. Find out why." It took 47 minutes to locate Mrs. Huang. She was hiding in her sister's apartment in Nowon, crying hysterically. It took Taejun 30 seconds to learn the truth. Sebastian Cross had kidnapped her son 2 weeks ago, had been using him as leverage, forcing Mrs. Huang to report Carol's movements, her routines, her vulnerabilities. Well, it took Taejun another hour to find out where Sebastian was keeping Carol. A warehouse in Incheon, isolated, heavily guarded. Perfect. "How many men can we mobilize?" Taejun asked Jinwoo. "In an hour, maybe 20. "We don't have an hour." Taejun checked his weapon, loaded a fresh magazine. "Get me 5 of our best, and someone who can drive a truck." "A truck, sir." "Sebastian likes making entrances." Taejun's smile was a terrible thing. "Let's make one he'll never forget." Carol woke to the smell of incense and flowers. For a confused moment, she thought she was back at the cathedral, back in the bridal suite, about to marry Sebastian. Then she saw the white dress laid out on the table beside her, and her blood ran cold. "You're awake," Sebastian said from somewhere behind her. "Good. I was worried Mrs. Huang had used too much sedative." Carol tried to move and discovered her hands were zip-tied to a chair. They were in a warehouse. She could see shipping containers stacked in the background, bare concrete floors, industrial lighting hanging from the ceiling. And in front of her, Sebastian had recreated a wedding ceremony. White flowers everywhere, candles, a makeshift altar, even a priest, though the terrified man in robes looked like he'd been dragged here against his will. "What is this?" Carol demanded, her voice hoarse. Sebastian walked into view, and Carol barely recognized him. His perfect hair was disheveled, his suit rumpled, and there was a manic edge to his expression that she'd never seen before. "This is our wedding, darling," he said, picking up the white dress. "The one you interrupted by running away. But don't worry, we're going to finish it now." "You're insane." "I'm motivated." Sebastian's smile was wrong, all teeth and no warmth. "Do you know what you cost me? The humiliation when you ran. The questions from my business partners about whether I could even control one woman. Kim Taejun parading you around like some trophy he stole from me." He grabbed Carol's face, fingers digging into her cheeks painfully. "You're mine, Carol. You were always mine. Your father sold you to me to pay his debts, and I'm going to collect what I'm owed." The debt. Taejun's words echoed in Carol's memory. Carol's father sold her to Sebastian to pay off a debt to Taejun. "My father didn't owe you," Carol said slowly, understanding dawning. "He owed Taejun. You were just the middleman." Sebastian's expression twisted with rage. "Details. The point is, you belong to someone, and that someone is me." "Belonged," Carol corrected. "Past tense. I belonged to Taejun the whole time, didn't I? That's why you're so desperate." You stole something that was never yours to take. Sebastian slapped her hard enough to snap her head sideways. Shut up. He threw the dress at her. You're going to put this on. You're going to marry me. And then I'm going to make sure Kim Tae-jun understands exactly what happens to people who take things from Sebastian Cross. Behind him, his security guards, a dozen men with weapons, watched with expressions ranging from boredom to discomfort. Carol met the priest's eyes and saw her own fear reflected there. Then she heard it, a sound like thunder. The north wall of the warehouse exploded inward as a fully loaded cargo truck crashed through the corrugated metal, scattering Sebastian's guards like bowling pins. The truck slammed into a shipping container, its horn blaring, and Tae-jun stepped out of the driver's seat like an avenging angel. He wasn't alone. Jin Woo and 4 other Seven Stars men emerged from the truck bed, weapons drawn, moving with coordinated precision. Sebastian Cross, Tae-jun called out, his voice carrying across the warehouse. We need to have a conversation about property rights. Sebastian grabbed Carol, yanking her chair backward, using her as a shield. Stay back. I'll kill her, I swear to God. No, you won't, Tae-jun said calmly, walking forward. Because if you kill her, you have no leverage. And without leverage, you're just a man who kidnapped someone under Seven Stars' protection. His men moved through the warehouse like shadows, disarming Sebastian's guards with brutal efficiency. Within 90 seconds, the balance of power had shifted completely. Sebastian pressed a gun against Carol's temple. I said, stay back. Tae-jun stopped, but his expression didn't change. Carol, he said quietly, do you trust me? Carol's heart was hammering, but she met his eyes across the warehouse. Yes. Then close your eyes and count to 3. She closed them. 1. She heard Tae-jun move. 2. Sebastian's grip tightened painfully. 3. A gunshot. The pressure of the weapon against her head disappeared. Carol's eyes snapped open to see Sebastian stumbling backward, a red stain spreading across his shoulder. His gun clattered to the floor. Carol didn't hesitate. Her hands were still zip-tied, but her legs were free. She kicked the chair over, rolling away from Sebastian, and grabbed his fallen weapon. By the time she got to her feet, she had it pointed directly at Sebastian's head. The warehouse went silent. Carol, Sebastian panted, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Baby, please, Don't call me that. Carol's hands were steady. The fear was gone, burned away by something harder, something that tasted like freedom. You tried to cage me. You tried to own me. You thought I was some fragile thing you could break and reshape into whatever you wanted. She took a step forward. You were wrong. Tae-jun appeared at her side, his own weapon drawn but pointed down. He didn't try to take her gun, didn't tell her to stand down, just stood there, a silent presence of support. Carol, Sebastian tried again. We can fix this. We can... It's over, Sebastian, Carol said. You've lost. She heard sirens in the distance. Tae-jun must have called them. The police are coming, Tae-jun said conversationally to Sebastian. And they're going to find you here with a kidnapped woman, illegal weapons, and about 17 different charges that will put you away for a very long time. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to discuss alternative arrangements. Sebastian's face went white. What kind of arrangements? The kind where you disappear, Tae-jun said. Leave the country, leave your businesses, leave everything behind and run as far as you can, because if I see you in Seoul again... His smile was death itself. Well, let's just say I won't be as merciful as Carol. Sebastian looked between them, at Carol holding his own gun on him, at Tae-jun radiating cold menace, at his own men already in custody. Fine, he spat. Fine. Take it all. I hope she destroys you the way she destroyed me. She already has, Tae-jun said softly. Tae-jun's penthouse had never looked more beautiful than it did at dawn. Carol stood by the windows, watching the sun rise over the Han River, wrapped in one of Tae-jun's shirts, a cup of coffee warming her hands. Behind her, she heard him enter. The police have closed the case, Tae-jun said. Sebastian's on a flight to Argentina. All charges against you have been dropped. You're officially a free woman. Carol turned to look at him. He stood in the doorway, still wearing the clothes from the warehouse, blood on his sleeve. Exhaustion etched in his features. Free, she repeated. Yes. He walked to the door, the penthouse's front door, and opened it. You can leave. Go anywhere you want. The debt is paid. You don't owe me anything. Carol looked at the open door, at freedom, at the life she could rebuild on her own terms. Then she looked at Tae-jun, at this dangerous man who'd protected her, defended her, trusted her with a loaded weapon and the power to make her own choices. She walked toward the door, and she watched something flicker in his eyes. Not quite pain, but close. Carol reached past him and pushed the door closed with a soft click. I'm already home, she said. Tae-jun's expression transformed. Not a smile, not quite, but something softer than she'd ever seen on his face. You're sure? He asked quietly. This world I live in, it's dark, dangerous. There's no going back once you choose it. I've seen darkness, Carol said, stepping closer. I've survived it, but I've also seen what it looks like when someone burns the world down to protect me. She reached up, touching the scar through his eyebrow gently. I'm not looking for rescue anymore, Tae-jun. I'm looking for partnership, for someone who sees me as dangerous, not delicate. His hands settled on her waist, pulling her against him. You are dangerous, little bird. You're the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to me. Good, Carol whispered against his lips. Then we'll be dangerous together. When he kissed her, it tasted like freedom. Outside, Seoul woke to a new day, unaware that in a penthouse overlooking the river, a runaway bride had finally found her home in the arms of the wolf she'd run to. And somewhere in Argentina, Sebastian Cross boarded a plane to a life of exile, haunted by the woman he'd tried to cage, who'd instead learned to fly.